Just too.
That's part. Hi, my name is Becky Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Weaving Influence, and I am so beyond thrilled to spend my afternoon with Jim Kouzes and Bill Treasurer. As we get started, we want to make sure that you're familiar with all of our technology. So if you could take a quick moment to find the question panel, we will be answering questions from you later on in the broadcast after a time of an interview between Bill and Jim. And so if you could take a moment, try out the question panel and tell me where you're calling from today, that would be fantastic. Hey, Jim, maybe you can tell us where you're calling from today.
Well, I'm here in sunny Orinda, California, across the bay from San Francisco.
Awesome. And Bill, how about you? I already know the answer, but why don't you tell us anyhow?
Asheville, North Carolina. It's about 62 degrees and beautiful today.
Awesome. I am calling in from Lambertville, Michigan, where it was 40 degrees when I came into the office this morning and freezing. So I see people from all over the U.S. I saw Switzerland. I see the great state of Texas. And part of the reason we do this is because it takes a few moments for everybody to come on the line. We want to make sure you don't miss a moment of our amazing content with Jim. Looks like we have a friend in Canada as well. And Mark from Fayetteville, North Carolina is saying hello. He's at the U.S. Army's largest base. So thank you so much to all of you. And I have a friend calling in from Maumee, Ohio. My running bud is on the call today. Welcome, Alexis. I think you're my running bud, maybe not. Anyhow, thanks to everyone for being with us. A few more things that you should know. I have 5 copies of Jim's new book, Learning Leadership, here in my office that we'll be giving away at the end of the call. And Wiley, Jim's publisher, has generously donated these books for today's event. One more thing, if you are on Twitter, we would love to have you participate live, and we are using the hashtag Learning Leadership, and we'd love to have you join our conversation there. One more thing, we will also be recording today's event, so you'll have a chance to watch it and share it with others. And Jim also is going to provide a PDF of today's slides. So no need to take notes. You can sit back, listen, learn, and enjoy. Before I turn this over to Bill, who is our host and our sponsor for today's event, I want to take a moment to introduce him. Bill and I have been friends for a while now, and he's been a client of our company since 2013. Bill is the author of several books, including Courage Goes to Work, Right Risk. The latest is Leaders Open Doors. And Bill has an exciting new book coming next year, and I hope my mom's not listening because his new book is entitled A Leadership Kick in the Ass. And oops. Hi, Mom. And so more about Bill. He's the founder and CEO of Giant Leap Consulting. He does speaking and consulting and training with organizations and has worked with companies like NASA, Saks Fifth Avenue, Spanx, Walsh Construction. Bill does some amazing work around the country and around the world. So Bill, thank you so much for the opportunity to support this event today. I'm going to turn off my camera and allow you and Jim to have this awesome conversation. I can't wait to learn from you.
Well, thanks so much, Becky. It's always a great pleasure to work with you and the Weaving Influence team. And thanks to everybody who's patching into the webinar today. I'm really thrilled to be here as well. And to hear so many people coming in from so many different places. And I know you're here to see and hear from Jim Kouzes. And I was first introduced to Jim's work along with his co-author Barry Posner back in the 90s. Back in the early 90s, in 1990, I was in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin, and I came across his work and other people's work as well, and came across the Leadership Challenge and the leadership practices that are outlined in the Leadership Challenge. So I always knew of this person for a long, long time. And the more that I've gotten to know Jim personally and professionally, the more impressed I am with this person. He's got every reason to not be humble, and yet he's one of the most humble and gracious human beings that I've met. I think you're in for a real treat for today. Let me share with you a little bit about Jim Kouzes for those on the webinar who may be less familiar. I think you're going to be impressed as well. So first of all, we have to start with the idea that he's a leader himself, and it goes way back. He was an Eagle Scout. Not only was he an Eagle Scout, but he got to be part of John F. Kennedy's inaugural honor guard, one of only 12 other Boy Scouts to be able to have that honor. And when he heard John F. Kennedy say, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," he heeded the call. Based on the inspiration of that speech, he joined the Peace Corps. Now, there's a lot of things that I can tell you about Jim Kouzes. There's, in fact, so much that we would run out of time. So I'm going to try to give you sort of the best of that you need to know. He was the president of the Tom Peters Company for over a decade. He led the Executive Development Center at Santa Clarita University. He founded the Joint Center for Human Services at San Jose State University. He's currently the Dean's Executive Fellow of Leadership at the Levy School of Business at Santa Clara University. He's won so many awards and accolades that I wouldn't have time to list them all, but I can tell you one that he won. He recently won the Thought Leadership Award from ISA, and I'm a member of that organization. And I can tell you, to get the Thought Leader Award, you're in really great company with the likes of Peter Senge and John Cotter and Ken Blanchard, etc. That's the kind of luminary that Jim Kouzes is. He wrote The Leadership Challenge along with Barry Posner, and that book has sold over 2 million copies. I can tell you that a couple of years ago, I got to speak at Jim's conference. He has an annual conference, the Leadership Challenge, and this year it's being held in Nashville, and I got to be the keynoter at one of them, and it was one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had. And afterwards, Jim sent me a thank you note that I literally cherish. Today, you're going to get to hear about Jim's new book that he co-authored with Barry Posner. And having read The Leadership Challenge, literally I did an LPI 360 yesterday on one of my executives, and I've done hundreds of them over the years. I can tell you, you're going to love this book. Learning leadership is fantastic. And today I'm excited that we're going to get to hear firsthand from Jim Kouzes about this wonderful book. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for your very gracious introduction. It was really a pleasure to have you speak at our forum a couple years ago, and we hope one of these days you'll come back.
I would love to be invited back for sure.
We're looking forward to your next book too.
Thanks. Well, terrific. Comes out in December.
Readers who would need a kick in the ass.
So I've got some questions that I'm going to ask Jim, and like Becky said, towards the end, we're going to open it up and you're going to be able to get some questions too. The questions are formulated around some content that Jim's going to share with you as well. The first question, maybe it's a little bit obvious, but what compelled you and Barry to write this book? What was the genesis? How would you say this book fits into the larger body of work that you and Barry have created?
Well, the first thing that we learned about leadership, we learned very early on, and that is the most important leaders are the leaders who are closest to us. Individual leaders, whether it's a supervisor, even a parent, a teacher, a coach, or a CEO, if you happen to directly report to that person, is the most important leader in the world. And we also learned early on that leaders impact talent, the utilization of talent. If we took a look at the impact of the worst leaders, that is the lowest in the constituents' mind, those who performed the poorest in their own personal experience, and those who were the best. And we looked at the utilization, the impact on talent, the utilization of their talent, skills, and abilities, capabilities. And we found that the worst leaders, from the constituents' perspective, utilized only on average 31.2%, whereas the best leaders utilized 95.1%. And in some cases, over 110%, they told us, which is a mathematical impossibility, but that's what they said. They said, hey, this person used more of me than even I knew that I had. And so we obviously want to be led by the best leaders because they bring out more of us than the worst leaders. So we then asked, well, does leadership behavior matter in terms of engagement? And what we found when we looked at engagement and individual demographics, now individual constituent demographics would be things like the age of the respondent, the country in which they were born and live, their religion, their gender, their function, industry, and so on. We looked at 9 demographic variables. And we looked at the impact that those variables, demographic variables, had on engagement and leader behavior had on engagement. And as you can see from this slide, the impact of demographics was from 0.1% to 0.3%. So less than 1% of engagement can be accounted for by 9 demographic variables combined, not just one single one, but combined. So in other words, individual demographics of a constituent doesn't really make any difference in terms of why they're engaged. Men, women, old, young, marketing, finance, in this country or in other countries, that doesn't matter. So what does? And we found that leader behavior has more of an impact on engagement than any other variable. It ranges, there's 7 different regions on the screen, from 50% to 35.5% in the United States and in Europe. Now, some other people say it accounts for as much as 50, 60, and even 70%. But whatever that percent is, it's far more than anything else that an organization does. And so we know that leadership matters and leadership makes a difference. But it was curious to us, Bill, that we kept getting asked one question. The most frequently asked question people put to us, and I imagine to you too, is, are leaders born or made? And we always have the same answer to this question. We have never met a leader who was not born. We're all born. We're all born. It's what you do with what you have that's really important. How do you utilize those skills and abilities? And so we took a look at, well, if leadership if we keep getting this question, are leaders born or made, what percentage of people actually out there show no leadership capability whatsoever? 0. And that percentage is 0.00013%.
Wow.
Now, if you do the math and ask yourself, how many people is that? Well, in a 100-person organization, that's 0. In a 1,000-person organization, that's 0. In a 10,000-person organization, that's still 0. In a 100,000-person organization, still 0. People demonstrate no leadership capability whatsoever.
Wow.
It takes 1 million people to find one who has no leadership skills at all. Or to put it on the positive side, 99.99987% of people in the world demonstrate leadership skills and abilities. And so that is why we wrote this book. We wanted to send the message that we don't have a leadership shortage in terms of capability or potential. There's a leadership shortage for other reasons. And we wanted to write about that.
Terrific. Terrific. You know, one of the things that interested me, actually you just sort of spoke to some of it, is this, you have some really interesting and startling statistics in the book. And one that you and Barry offer, a striking statistic in my mind, is this sort of evidence that the world is having a crisis of leadership at the moment and that we all want better leaders. Can you share some of the statistics around the crisis of leadership that the world feels that we're suffering?
And we all seem to be experiencing that around the world. And you can look at Brazil, you can look at the United States and what's happening here. You can look at what's happened in Europe. All around the world, 86% of people, according to the World Economic Forum, which did this study in 2015 and published it in the end of 2015, found that 86% of the people in the world agree that there is a crisis in the world. Interestingly, 86% of companies are concerned about a shortage in their leadership pipeline. 86% are worried. They don't think there are enough leaders in the future. Now, we would say there actually are enough, and that's not really the issue, but it's a worry. It's a worry. 86% worry about all the retiring boomers, the not just the senior positions that are going to go unfilled, but the middle level and frontline leadership roles in organizations, plus all the opportunities that there are for leadership in our communities, in our schools, in our nonprofit organizations. People are worried that we're not doing enough. And that would be affirmed by millennials who are the ones moving into those roles. It turns out that when you ask a millennial how prepared they are and how concerned they are about their readiness, 63% say they're not fully developed to be leaders. They just haven't had the opportunity to be fully developed. And only 36% of millennials feel prepared to take on those roles.
Isn't that interesting? And they're the ones that are going to be leading us. Not, they're already moving into leadership positions. You mentioned that the ability to learn is really the most critical leadership skill of all. Why so?
Again, in our research, Barry and I looked at the relationship between learning and leading. And with a colleague, Lillis Brown, out of the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, we did a study of the learning styles of people inside organizations of all kinds. And then we looked at the extent to which they engaged in the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. So the question is, does learning make any difference in terms of how people perform? Now, we're in that business, and so we have a bias, but we wanted to check this out. And what we learned was rather interesting. We learned that while some styles, such as an experiential learning style compared to a more reflective learning style or an observational one where you watch someone and you try to copy what they do, use them as role models, while those make some difference in little ways, the major finding was that the style of learning doesn't really matter. What matters is the extent to which you engage in it, because what we found was that those individuals who engage more frequently in learning also engage more frequently in exemplary leadership behavior. So learning helps to explain why certain leaders are better than other leaders. And that was sort of what led us to the fundamentals. So what is it then that we need to do to create a climate in which people can learn most effectively, and a context in which you can develop yourself? You can take accountability and control of your own learning if you don't happen to be in a company that has all of the resources that make you the best company for leaders in the world. But how do you create that context for yourself? And there are 5 things we came up with. The first of those is you have to believe that you can. The second is you have to aspire to excel. Challenge yourself is the third. The fourth is engage support. And the fifth is practice deliberately. And we can talk more about that if you'd like.
Good. Well, actually, I would like to talk a little bit more about that. In particular, this idea of believing you can. The book really stresses the point that you can't be an exemplary leader if you can't see yourself as one. Talk about the importance of belief relative to leading.
Barry and I were at one of our forums that we talked about earlier in New Orleans. And we were walking around in the French Quarter area where there are lots of shops, and we happened to both pass by separately an art store that had this particular print in it. Jim Tweedy did this, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful expression of what we're talking about. Here we have this pudgy little cat looking in the mirror and seeing its own reflection. But on the canvas is a self-portrait of a tiger. And this is, when you look in the mirror, who do you see? Do you see a pudgy little cat, or do you see a fierce tiger? And that's the question we have, first of all, for leaders. When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Do you see someone who has the capability to become an extraordinary, exemplary leader or not? And Dan Wong, who was one of the people we interviewed, said to us, leaders believe in their abilities to make a difference. So the very first step is to acknowledge that I can improve my leadership skills. That really is the very first step. And also inside organizations, managers can encourage that. Imagine your own career 10 years out was one of the requests that one of our constituents had when she was talking to the people. Nancy Sullivan is her name. Nancy Sullivan asked her constituents to also do the same. So the next thing that we find is that people with a fixed mindset did not profit from their own mistakes, according to Carol Dweck, but those with the growth mindset kept on learning. So whether you're creating a context for people inside your organization to help them lead, or whether you're realizing, as Dan did, that you have to that you have to realize for yourself that you have the capability to lead. Another thing you have to ask yourself is, do you really believe that you can grow, or that you're adaptable, that you're changeable, or that whatever you have, you're born with, and that's it? Carol Dweck, in some seminal research, and I highly recommend her book, Mindset, to everyone, finds that those with a growth mindset not only are better, get better grades in school, but also at work are more engaged in work, those who have a growth mindset, than those with a fixed mindset. And so all of these things indicate to us that you have to have a belief in yourself. So if we take a look at a self-coaching action that all of us might engage in, at the beginning of every day, just remind yourself that you can make a positive difference in the world. Affirm one thing that you're going to do that day that demonstrates that.
Good point. And one thing that I loved about the book is that you have those self-coaching actions. So somebody can read this book and you're telling them to get involved with the book, engaging them, giving them things that they can do so that they actually strengthen their leadership. One of the other fundamentals you talk about is this idea of aspiring to excel. You talk about aspiring to excel and place a lot of emphasis on value-based motivations. Talk about that idea a little bit.
Yeah, we were really struck by a piece of research that was done by some colleagues in the military. And I know that there's some from the military on this call. And there was a piece of research done at the West Point that was astounding. They were able to follow graduates from West Point, about 10,000 of them, for 4 to 10 years, depending upon when they graduated from West Point. And they had initially asked, as all graduates are, they'd done a lot of testing and at the beginning. And one of the things that they asked all the cadets was to indicate the extent to which they were driven by certain motivations, which they referred to as instrumental and intrinsic. So things that are instrumental or extrinsic are rewards like I'm joining West Point because I'm enrolling in West Point because I know that when I am done with my tour with the Army, I will be able to get a better job. I'll get a higher paying job. Whereas those who are more internally motivated or intrinsically motivated when they enter the academy are those who want to serve their country or those who want to become the best officers they can be. Those who had the internal motivations ended up doing much better in the military over that 4 to 10 year period than those who were driven by the extrinsic motivations. And what's interestingly was when you put the two together, extrinsic and intrinsic, or instrumental and internal, it didn't improve the situation at all. Still, the solely internal motivations were the drivers for performance inside the military. So we have to be clear why we are engaging in leadership development. Are we doing it? And as HR people, are we promoting it because you're a high potential person and you're a prospect for getting a more senior position in this organization? Are you going to get more pay or a bonus? Or are we telling people you need to do this because it will help you be a better leader, serve your constituents, serve your customers, serve your organization more effectively? That's why we're enrolling you in this. Yes, maybe down the road people will have these other rewards, but what is the reason why people are engaging this? And the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, you can do this internally by getting people to stretch themselves and think longer term, think about your career as Nancy Sullivan did that I mentioned earlier. And so here's a self-coaching action that you might want to think about for yourself. Think about 10 years out and you're getting the Leader of the Year award. What do you hope people will say about you when they talk about you at this award ceremony? When they talk about the lessons that they learned from you, the ideals that you stood for, the feelings they had when they were around you, or the evidence that you actually made a contribution. Do that exercise so that you begin to stretch yourself, both thinking about how you want to be in 10 years and the lessons that people will learn from you and the ideals you stood for, but also then what's the evidence that you will actually be doing those things.
That's a really good question, and I ask a similar question. I have a comprehensive leadership development program that I put together for one of my clients. It's 18 months long, and in the beginning of the program, we ask the participants, "What is it? Not that you hope to get out of this program, but you hope to get out of the leadership experience when your career is all done." And the most common answer that we hear is that I've created other leaders, that I've left a legacy by helping other people find the leader in them, which I always found kind of interesting. The So let's move on to another question. And that's one thing I found interesting, and that I agree with, by the way, is that strength-based leadership approaches, which are really popular these days, and I get it, right? Like I support strength-based coaches, but that it doesn't go far enough. You have an interesting take. I think it's somewhat provocative. I'm aligned with it as well, but I'd like you to share a little bit about that.
Yes, while I too have a lot of respect for the research that the folks have done who've written about this, taken to an extreme, it can actually inhibit leadership growth. And that extreme is when we see that, well, I should only work on my strengths. I should never work on my weaknesses. I shouldn't try to do something I don't really have the inclination to do. And so it can actually diminish our capability, not increase our capability. Why is that? Because what we have found in our research and others, and it's kind of represented by this story from Kaylee Adair, who was a high school student when I first talked with her. She's now a college student at the University of Alabama. She said, my favorite thing about human beings is that we're never satisfied with our condition. It turns out that when we did our initial research on personal best leadership experiences, challenge was the critical variable in every situation that people talked about as their personal best. We didn't ask them to write about challenge or change or difficulty or adversity or failure. We asked them to write about their personal best. And when they wrote about their personal best, they said they tried to do something that had never been done before, that they didn't know how to do, or they were thrown into a situation where they didn't have those skills and abilities. Well, we got cases where, for example, someone's business was destroyed in an earthquake. Now that's a challenge. They'd never experienced this before, and yet they rose to the occasion. So we know that challenge is the opportunity for greatness. And if we don't introduce challenge to someone's career opportunities, they can't grow and develop, because learning is not within the boundaries of what you already know how to do. It's outside those boundaries by definition. And a learning curve is just that. It's a curve. It's not a straight line. And so you have to expect that there are going to be ups and downs. And so we need to disabuse folks of the notion that they only need to work on their strengths, but they also need to work on their weaknesses and challenge themselves to do things they didn't think they knew how to do. I found in doing some reading recently, I came across a story about Louis C.K. Now, Louis C.K. is the comedian, the Emmy Award-winning comedian, has a TV show and stand-up comic. And someone once asked him, so, I want to be a stand-up like you. How do I become a great one like you? And he said, well, he thought about it for a moment. He said, the only road to good shows is bad ones. Just go start having a bad time. And if you don't give up, you will get better. And I think that is so terrific, because Louis C.K.'s comment is perfectly aligned with Angela Duckworth's research on grit. Angela said, I'll bet there isn't a single highly successful person who hasn't depended on grit. Bill, I love that you've held up our book. I really appreciate it, but I'm going to hold up Angela's. This book is just out. The book is called Grit by Angela Duckworth. It is a fabulous, fantastic book, and I think will help people understand why you and I, while we acknowledge the importance of strengths, we also emphasize the need to persevere in difficult times and work on those things you're not good at. You were an athlete for a lot of your life. I don't know if people on this call know this, but you did some rather courageous and frightening things in your life. I don't think that the very first time you went up that ladder, that was somebody said, oh, I'm going to have a great time here. This is wonderful. This is going to be fun. You were scared to death.
Yeah.
And you persevered. and you went through the difficult times to get to where you did. So you have to have grit. And that leads to another self-coaching action, which is answer this question for yourself at the end of every day or at any time. What's the next step in your development that is both important to you? So it's got to be something you're passionate about and are interested in, and that will challenge you.
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really good point. And you're right. When I was a high diver and I used to dive off 100-foot platforms, really when I was learning how to even get to the regular high dive at 3 meters, I wanted to quit diving. Fortunately, I had a coach who would not let me turn away from my potential, who nudged me into my discomfort zone, and who helped me embrace the fact that this is how you learn. This is what learning is all about. And in fact, it's what courage is all about. It gave me my whole career, that sort of experience that being nudged into my discomfort for my own benefit. So I'm aligned with that idea of challenging yourself. And I think that leadership especially is for challenging times, not sort of status quo times. So my next question would be about engagement. Leaders are individuals. So some authors put a lot of emphasis on the notion of self-reliance. And you and Barry take a different take. Talk about how learning leadership takes more than just self-reliance, and in fact includes building a broad network that promotes the development, mentoring, and nurturing of leadership. You even suggest this idea of creating a personal board. So what I hear in all of that is you really can't do it all yourself, and you do need to have a network, a community around you to help strengthen your leadership.
Yeah, one of the things we learned about leadership is you can't lead alone. And we learned the same thing about learning. When we looked at effective learning, we found that unless there's a period of time, as Benjamin Bloom observed when he wrote about this now over 30 years ago, that when he was looking at developing talent, he said that unless there's a long and intensive process of encouragement, nurturance, education, and training, individuals won't attain the extreme levels of capability. In his work and other people's work, like Anders Ericsson and in Angela's work, it takes a coach, a parent, a support system, a manager, a mentor, and a whole social support system to develop exemplary performance. I mean, if you think about, Stephen Curry as one example, he just was MVP. It happened to be from the Golden State Warriors, our team out here in the Bay Area. But when he got up on that stage to receive the award, did he say, well, I did this all by myself and I thank you all very much? No, he thanked his wife. He thanked his daughters. He thanked his family, his mother and his father, who happened, by the way, to be a basketball player himself. He thanked his teammates. He thanked his coaches. He thanked his trainers. He thanked all these people, and he gave them the credit for where he is today. Exemplary performers do that. They know they require a support system. In a recent book that was written by Brian Grazer, who's a movie producer in Hollywood and wrote the book Curious Mind, another book I highly recommend about a personal experience around curiosity, said I had one rule for myself. I had to meet one new person in the entertainment business every day. He said that accounted for as much of his success as being good at producing movies. It's because he was curious about other people and wanted to get to know what made them tick, what tips they had for him. And he was curious to learn from everyone else. And another important thing is modeling. You need to find somebody who can be an exemplary role model for you if you're going to develop your competencies. So that leads to another self-coaching action, which is about utilizing this notion of a personal board of directors. Think about who the people are that you can turn to for support, counsel, guidance, and help, and write their names down and give them a call or write them an email. All they can do is say no to you. But for the most part, we have found that if there's somebody that knows you and you know them and you need their help, they are quite willing to give it. and think about how you can utilize them. Who can be a role model for you? Who can be somebody that you could talk to when times are tough? Who's been through an experience that you're going through right now that can offer you advice and counsel? Who can coach you on some new skills and abilities? Develop that personal board of directors and make opportunities for you to meet with that board periodically.
I think that that's a great point. I dedicated my last book, Leaders Open Doors, to 5 mentors in my life, people who had made all that kind of difference to me. And I find what the boomerang effect is when you are the recipient of that sort of leadership mentoring, it's only natural that when you are in a position of leadership influence that you start wanting to do that for others. So there is this kind of pay it forward effect.
Reciprocity, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I've got another question for you, and then we'll probably have time to open it up to the listeners and webinar attendees. We've got a whole bunch of them today. Great turnout, by the way, for this webinar. One of the things that I found most valuable about that book is that it's packed with practical tips that leaders can use to be more effective and influential. In addition to the tips you've already offered today, what are a few actions that our webinar attendees can apply immediately to start learning about leadership?
Well, this notion of practicing deliberately is another key to successful leadership or success in any field. And again, both Angela Duckworth writes about it in Grit, and also Anders Ericsson just came out with a new book called Peak, in which he talks about this same thing and lays out in great detail the importance of deliberate practice. And he made a comment, Bill, that I just love. Living in a cave doesn't make you a geologist. The whole notion that if we just experience something and we experience it for a long time, we'll get really good at it. In fact, one of the startling pieces of research that is kind of disturbing a little bit to me is he says his research indicates that new graduates out of medical school, 5 years out of residency, are often more competent than physicians who've been practicing for 20 years.
Wow.
Because they just learned the most recent, newest techniques. And one of the things that happens with people who've been practicing a profession for 20 years is they don't keep up. Whether it's law or whether it's business, we don't keep up. We assume that because we're in it and we're experiencing it every day, we're getting better every day. Not so. We have to engage then in deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice is characterized by a few things. The first of those is you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to challenge yourself. You got to set specific goals for yourself. You got to have a target that you want to shoot for. It's not just about going to the driving range and hitting the bucket of balls. It's having a goal for yourself every time you go out. It's about paying attention and focusing. So you got to concentrate when you practice. It's not just putting on your iPod in your ears and listening to tunes while you run on the treadmill. You got to really pay attention to what you're doing and how your body is feeling and how you're moving or how your mind is working or how the interaction with another person is going. And then you also need to get immediate feedback. And then finally, you need to also engage in designed learning activities with a teacher and a coach, not just, anything that you kind of feel like doing that day, but rather design learning activities. And what we have to do in order to make that practical is turn our workplaces into practice fields. One of the things that we write about is how you can take any situation in an organization and turn it into a practice opportunity. You could, for example, have a meeting that you regularly go to and have a goal for yourself, let's say around active listening. And you announce that intention and you tell people, I'm going to be working on active listening and I've got someone in this room that's going to give me feedback afterwards. I want you to give me feedback while I'm doing it. Am I doing that? You can then create mini practice opportunities. That might add up to a couple hours during the day, but they're only 15 minutes or 30 minutes in length at one particular time, where you intentionally concentrating, focusing on a goal that you want to do, using some technique that you've learned and getting some immediate feedback while also getting some help from other people. If we could do that in organizations, we would significantly increase the competency of people in leadership and in other domains at work.
Mm.
So I just leave with one last coaching action on this topic of the 5 fundamentals. And that is, at the end of each day, record your answer to this question: what have I done today to improve so I'm better today than I was yesterday? Make a habit of doing that. If you do it every day, and you just do it at work 250, or you do it at home and at work 365 days a year, just think about how much learning you will accrue in that period of time.
You know, what great advice and great tips all along the way. Imagine, folks, that the folks that are attending today, you just heard 45 minutes worth, maybe 10% of what's in this book. I mean, this book is loaded, jam-packed with all sorts of research, practical advice, great stories. I mean, it's as good as a leadership challenge, if you ask me. And I think that you're going to love it. And I invite you to go to your latest bookseller and get a copy. But hey, we still have time. The great news is now we get to hear from you, and so you get to chat in whatever questions you've got for Jim or myself. We're both happy to respond. I'm sure that you'll want to hear from Jim more than me, but let's go ahead and open the lines up. And Becky, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So we do have several questions already that have been coming in throughout the broadcast. And I'm going to start with this one from Gail. Related to this topic of challenging yourself, Jim, Gail is wondering, do you believe that people must work on all their weaknesses or only those of significance, such as those that are debilitating? So how do we decide which weaknesses we should work on?
Yeah, we worked on all our weaknesses, Bill. I think we'd be consuming 24/7.
I would.
But at least I speak for myself. No, I that's a great question. Thank you very much for that. Yes, we in any developmental activity, pick one thing you want to work on at a time, and work on it to the point where you have increased your level of competence in that area. Don't try to take on too much. So any great coach will advise you to pick one goal for yourself in one specific area. I gave the example of active listening, for example. You get feedback that you're talking more than you're listening, that you're shutting other people down, that you're not paying attention to the input of other people, you're only presenting your ideas. If you get that feedback, set a goal around that and work on that. And to determine which that should be, we use an assessment tool, as Bill mentioned, the LPI 360, where people get feedback on their leadership practices and they pick an area on which they could work. I don't know, Bill, how would you respond to that question?
I say the question again so that I can hear it fresh.
So the question, Bill, is do you need to work on all your weaknesses or just the debilitating
I think,
ones?
I answer it like this. How we work with our senior leaders when we're doing leadership development programs is the idea of sunshine and shadows, that a lot of times your debilitating weakness is very often connected to an outgrowth over the overuse of your strength. So in my case, for example, I think I'm a pretty decent presenter. I actually like being in front of groups of people. The challenge with that is if I have to start hogging all the attention, if it's got to be all about me, then I start sucking the attention out of the room, and that's not fair to other people. So, or you might have somebody who's a very sort of assertive kind of person, great at taking charge. But if they have to dominate everything and start to over-control things, now that strength turns into a limitation. So they might think about actually what is their great strength, but what is the overusage of that strength? When it crosses a certain threshold, they have their sunshine now starts to cast a shadow. So that's where I would start, is what's the overuse of their great strength that may start to become a weakness, and focus on that.
That's helpful. So as I said, a flood of questions here, and Paul just asked one that I had jotted down myself, so I'm going to ask his. Paul's wondering about this whole idea of the personal board of directors to help people improve as a leader. My question would be, Jim, how many people should you have on that board? How often should you meet with them? And Paul's question is, can you share an example of someone who's used a personal board of directors to grow as a leader?
Sure. Let me answer the latter one. This idea got this idea from a similar one that Jim Collins wrote about, and he has one. So Jim Collins, very well-known author in this field, runs his own company, highly paid presenter, great consultant, has a personal board of directors. I know other executives that I coached, and kind of my rule in coaching is I don't mention names, but many that we give this advice to, because you have to engage the support of other people. Uh, one of the other individuals that I had the opportunity to be mentored by was John Gardner. John Gardner was the former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, served in 5 different administrations, 5 presidents of the United States, founded Common Cause and taught at Stanford, not too far from me. And John's a wonderful man. And he used to say, pity the leader caught between unloving critics and uncritical lovers. What we need to do is surround ourselves with loving critics, people who care about us and yet will give us straight, honest feedback about how we're doing. Who are those people in your life around that area which you need to develop yourself in? And that board may change from time to time as your needs change, just as in boards of directors for corporations or nonprofits. You know, as needs change, the board members may change. Don't be afraid to bring somebody new in. The number, I like Miller's magic number. It's always 7 plus or minus 2. So 5 to 9 people is a good number. Fewer is probably easier to manage, but your needs may dictate that you need more people at one particular time or another.
Thanks. And a follow-up to that set of questions, and Bill, perhaps you'd have some insight on this. I have 2 different people asking about how you recommend finding a mentor and how you recommend finding that board of directors. Amy and Rebecca, thank you for those questions.
Well, I'll comment on the mentor as somebody, again, my life inside of the practice of leadership, and I do, I am a leadership plumber. I go to work every day and remove leadership hairballs with the leaders that I work with. It's what I do for a living. But even outside of my practice of leadership, in my spiritual area of my life, in my athletic area of my life, that I've had so many leaders and mentors prop me up that I would be such a lesser person if it wasn't for that. So I'm really strong on it. I think one thing to recognize is just be mindful of, or observant of leaders and mentors who have something that you'd like to get, that you feel a certain deficiency, or you feel that it's latent inside of you and it's not yet fully expressed, and you see somebody else who has that thing. So it could be mentoring moments. It could be around a certain skill. It could be around a competency that you don't possess or want to possess more of. I think I love this idea of the loving critic. What I call it, I call that being a broccoli pointer. You need somebody that after you eat lunch, and if you got a little broccoli in your teeth, that they're the person who will actually tell you that. You could also call it your chief ego deflator. You need somebody who's good at being able to sort of deflate that ego when it's starting to get in the way too much. I'll tell you what, Becky, I've got a notebook that we put together as part of Giant Leap Consulting's material we actually have a mentoring class, and I'd be happy to send it as part of the follow-up material afterwards, because there's some guidance in there about what to look for in a mentor.
Right.
Thanks so much. All right, so here's a tough question, and I've seen at least 2 people ask this question related to toxic leadership. So Ross is wondering, in the midst of a soul-crushing leadership style and system, as a follower, what do you do, or how do you recover from having been involved with a really bad leader? And there were, like I said, 2 people, Ross and one more, who asked about, how do you handle a toxic leader?
Well, let me offer something. I know Bill has some good advice around this topic. He's written about it. One of the dilemmas that we all face is we would all like to be led by exemplary leaders, because we know they bring out more talent. We know that we're more engaged when they do. Sadly, that's not always the case. I've had some terrible leaders in my life, in organizations, particularly in the early parts of my career. And this is where we have to make some personal decisions about our own lives. That's why we wrote this book with self-coaching actions, and not here's what the organization can do for you, but here's what you can do for yourself. And so one of the things that is important in developing ourselves as leaders is to take the personal responsibility for that development. Not saying that the organization has no responsibility, but first of all, I have to ask all these questions about myself. Do I believe that I can learn to lead? What are my aspirations? What is the challenge I'm going to undertake? All of those things. And we may come to the conclusion that we need to move on. And in the environment that I'm currently in, I used to have a goal in my life, Becky. I joined the Peace Corps because I wanted to change the world. I switched to leadership development because the world was a little too big a place, and organization development because that seemed like more manageable. Now in my life, I'm working on just me because that's about all I can manage. And I think that in some respects, if we turn the focus on I'm the person who's going to be developing myself and I'm going to utilize all these resources, we turn the process around and we start making demands of the organization and not the other way around. Or we start looking for those opportunities. One other thing about toxic leaders. In any kind of toxic situation, it requires more resilience and as Bill will probably tell you, courage on your part. This is where courage comes in. Do I confront this person or do I not? What are the consequences of that? Am I willing to live with those consequences? Some of those consequences might be quite negative. What are they? What's the worst thing that can happen to me? And if that worst thing does happen to me, then what are my options? And to think through all of those options and who else can I turn to at a time like this for advice and support? Who can help me? Whose support can I engage? Maybe it's another member of my personal board of directors that can help me through this and give me some advice and counsel. So don't try to deal with this all by yourself. While you have to take personal responsibility for the situation, don't try to do it all by yourself. Engage in the help of others.
I would add that we start our leadership programs many times. We don't deify the idea of leadership, and we don't put it on we don't get on a soapbox. In fact, we start from a contemplation of bad leadership. And the truth is, leading is really hard, and it's easy to sort of second guess or point a finger at that person who's in the leadership role, thinking we could do better. And then you get in there, and it's really hard. Now, I'll tell you that my own leadership experience, I got interested in the idea of leadership because I had an employee when I was 23 years old confront me on my poor leadership. He told me that I sucked at leadership. I was leading this young group of athletes for the first time, and I was really obnoxious because I had no idea who I was as a leader. The only reference points I had to draw on was the boss that I had before that, and ultimately the boss before that, and my dad. I was my dad coming out of my body because I didn't know who to be as a leader. So when this employee confronted me, I got defensive and told him I'm his boss. It's not the other way around. But I got thinking about it that night. Gandhi said the truth only hurts if it should. And it stung. And I got to the point where, first of all, I recognized he had a lot of courage to tell me that. And it caused me to pick up my first book on leadership that I read, which was The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard. And then I came across this term organizational development, and I started reading other books. And I decided to go to graduate school. And I did my thesis on leadership. And now I practice leadership because one guy had the courage to confront my poor and obnoxious leadership. Now, it was a risk for him. And, there could be consequences if a person does that. We learn really, really important lessons from those poor leaders. We learn how not to be. But if you're wanting a reference, I share two. First of all, Stanley Milgram wrote a book. And Stanley Milgram is a giant. He's really the person who gives us the 6 degrees of separation, the Kevin Bacon game. He wrote a book called Obedience to Authority. It is profound. You ought to read that book. It's amazing. And then there's another book that I had to look up while we were actually answering this question. It's a great book. I just forgot who the author was. But Jean Lippman Blumen wrote a book called The Allure of Toxic Leaders. And honest to goodness, I think it's a great leadership read, and it's worth, I think that it's, there's probably even some national contemplation of this idea as we go into the campaign we have to really, there's some connection here between leadership and what's going on at the national level. I think that both of those books are worth reading.
Thanks so much to both of you for that. So Sarah wrote in a few minutes ago and said that her organization, including herself, is in desperate need of leadership retraining. Do either of you gentlemen have a suggestion of where she and her organization can start?
Jim, I'll let you answer that question.
Well, Bill had talked about the fact that that he offers leadership development, and so he's a resource to you and his organization. We do too. And I think we're going to post some contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us at the end, and we'd be happy to help you. And also, I think just doing some things like those self-coaching actions, which are in learning leadership, doing some things that will help you develop. Start by thinking about, what did I learn today about leading, and start keeping a record of those kinds of things. So start now by doing some things on your own, but we'll be glad to help you find some resources that will fit your needs. And that information will be posted at the end of this broadcast.
Well, another thought that I've got for you as well is, likewise, we do leadership development. It's what, we've been doing. My company, Giant Leap Consulting, has been around now for 13 years, and it's the primary bulk of our business. One thing that we do, and we did it a couple of times this past year, once for the Department of Justice and another time for a company called USLBM, is that we've gotten together with somebody just like yourself, and we go to the Catalyst Ranch in Chicago, and we ideate together, and we think about what are the elements of the leadership program that need to change from what you've got now, and we start to help you think. And it's a creative design day, and it's not that expensive. It's pretty inexpensive compared to the regular workshops and such. And it's like a day off for you, even though you're thinking in a constructive way that benefits your organization. So you could approach us about doing a design day with you.
And Becky, just like to add, our contact information is right there on the bottom of that slide that's up, leadershipchallenge.com. And on our schedule, there are some preview days of that are hour, 2 hour, or half day of the kind of thing we do. And we're happy to have anyone participate in that and see whether that's the kind of thing that they'd like to continue with. We've been doing this now for over 30 years, so we'd be delighted to work with you.
So I'm going to just handle one more question because I thought this was a really great one from Jane. And she said, with senior leadership in so many companies focused strongly on the bottom line and pleasing Wall Street, how could or should we convince senior leaders to allow more room for practice at the workplace? So you referenced, make your workplace a practice field for these ideas.
Well, we shared lots of data at the beginning about the need for leadership, and that one slide about how leadership makes a difference should be persuasive to anyone. When we know that leadership makes significantly more difference than any one individual's attributes or that any one individual can, that should be persuasive enough. And I would just take that data to my organization and say, if you want to improve the engagement in this organization, the profitability of this organization, by investing in leadership development, we will get more bang for our buck than by investing in other kinds of development. It is imperative that we do this. 86% of companies say there's a shortage of leadership. 86% of people say there is a crisis of leadership in the world. 36% of millennials moving into leadership positions feel prepared, and 63% say they aren't prepared. What more data do you want?
That's a really strong reminder as we wrap up this amazing hour together. Bill and Jim, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I want to give a shout out to Chris, who said that while we were on this call, he went and bought 6 copies of this, and he said it's because he sucks as a leader. I bet not. I bet you're more amazing than you realize, Chris, and thanks for buying the book. And thanks to all of you for being a part of this event today. Jim and Bill, again, thank you so much. We do have some follow-up material on this slide. You can buy this book wherever books are sold. You can check out Jim at leadershipchallenge.com. Bill and Giant Leap Consulting, the generous sponsors and hosts of today's event, and I'll be in touch via email with recordings and slides and more follow-up. Thanks so much. Have a
Thank you,
fantastic
everybody.
day.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.